The Retail Shop Leases Act of 1994, the Act, introduces certain notice and disclosure requirements regarding the renewal of retail shop leases. Therefore, it is crucial for both the landlord and the tenant to understand what they need to do in the renewal process to ensure a smooth transition. We have prepared some information to help you better comply with the requirements. Is there an option to renew? If yes, the landlord must give the tenant between 2 and 6 months written notice reminding the tenant of the last date to exercise the renewal option. There will be a monetary penalty for the landlord if the landlord does not give such notice. However, the tenant will not have additional rights simply because the landlord fails to give notice. Also, note that renewal is not an opportunity for the landlord to review the current lease. The tenant is entitled to a further lease on similar terms except for terms necessary to reflect the passing of time and any changes in the parties. If no, the landlord still needs to give written notice to the tenant advising whether they intend to renew the lease or not. This notice must be given between 3 to 6 months if the current lease term is less than 1 year, or between 6 to 12 months if the current lease is more than 1 year, before the lease expires. If the required notice is not given, the tenant can request an extension before the current lease expires by giving a written notice to the landlord. The lease can be extended for another 6 months after the landlord gives the notice required by the Act. Requirements for renewal. Check the current lease term. The lease might contain terms stipulating the conditions for exercising the right to renew. Generally, there will be a condition requiring the tenant not to default when renewing the lease. It is always a good idea to read the clauses carefully in advance to keep yourself informed. Disclosure requirements. Once the landlord receives notice from the tenant wishing to exercise the renewal option, the Act requires the landlord to give a disclosure statement within 7 days upon receipt of that notice. Then, the tenant has the right to withdraw from the renewal within 14 days of receiving the disclosure statement. Failing to comply with the landlord's disclosure requirement will allow the tenant to terminate within 6 months of entering into the renewal and to seek compensation from the landlord. Other things to note. Registration. A lease with a term of over 3 years is required to be registered. It is recommended to register the new lease to protect both parties' interests. And finally, no stamp duty. Currently, there is no stamp duty required for renewal of a lease.